Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 11 of the 20s Leadership Podcast. Now, I'm really excited about this particular podcast today because it's the first leadership conversations podcast that I've recorded so far. I've got Jack Burnett on, who is a good friend and also an ex-colleague of mine from the college. And we talk about the topic of failure and the importance of that when it comes to our own self-development. So again, really excited about this, and I hope that you enjoy it. And if you've got any sort of thoughts, whether it's good, whether it's how it can be better, whether it's something that you'd want to be involved with, I am all ears for anything positive about the progression and growth of this podcast. So we'll get stuck in, and I hope you enjoy.
As you're drinking your cola, I'll introduce you. So basically, on the podcast today, we have Jack Burnett, who is a sports lecturer at North East Scotland College and has been involved in and out of rugby coaching throughout his career so far, including a captaincy stint within his rugby teams as well. So he knows a lot about leadership. So let's welcome Jack to the podcast.
Happy to be here.
And yeah, Jack, give us a little background story about yourself involved in leadership.
So like you mentioned, I am the current captain of my rugby team, setting 15, but it doesn't. So I've had a wee bit of leadership in practical terms there.
Player of the year last year.
Yeah, we'll just drop that in. You know, it was actually second 15 player of the year, but it doesn't matter. It's, it's still got the trophy. And I'm a teacher as well. I teach largely sports coaching. So I basically teach leadership in a sports setting quite frequently, and I have coached quite a lot throughout my career as well, including for the Scottish Rugby Union for a while. So, yep, quite well practiced, I think.
Superb. And again, this is good because we can put you on the spot a little bit. But leadership, what does leadership mean to you, and how would you kind of describe it?
Leadership to me is largely about decision making under pressure. The decision might be to allow other people to make the decision and recognize that they're better placed to make an executive decision, but I think ultimately it falls to the leader to decide that is where he wants to go. But I think it is largely to do with leadership and sort of just organizing and steering people and groups of people in the way that you think best for them to go. I think towards a goal is a better steering people towards a goal through decision making and things like that. I think is a good summary.
And I guess a lot of the theme has been about self leadership going forward as well. So like self-awareness, self-management. Would there be a difference to your definition in regards to self-leadership as well as?
Well, I think I kind of
general.
I think I kind of touched on it a minute ago there when I sort of said, sometimes being in leadership, you have to realize that maybe you're not best placed to kind of make a decision and things like that. And I think that comes from that level of self-awareness and recognizing, okay, so these are my strengths and what I can bring to the game or the platform or the performance or whatever. And also recognizing that other people might have that as well and saying, okay, so this is where my strengths are, but these are other people's. I think that,
Love it. So as we discussed earlier, obviously the topic of the day, again, something you're very passionate about, is the topic of failure.
I don't really know how I got landed with that label. If nobody knows who's listening, I did a video for Lawrence once on failure, and from then it kind of spiraled, and now I'm known as like the failure guy. I ended up delivering
in a positive way.
In a positive way, but I ended up delivering a course to like young rugby players in Aberdeen on failure, and based on the back of that video. And I don't know how it's kind of become this, but yeah, I'm now the failure guy. Know everything about it.
Brilliant. And I guess obviously the whole format of this podcasts as well just now. There's a lot of interview sort of podcasts out there. This is purely a sort of conversation where we will,
Sure.
generate momentum and interesting conversations on the topic of failure and leadership as we go. So we can use a few questions to get the ball rolling. So, how significant a role do you believe failure plays in self-development?
So I think self-development is about largely self-awareness. It's about knowing what you're good at, where your areas of improvement lie, and I think failure is a really, really important tool for indicating where your weaker areas are and where your strong areas are. I think that's, so for me, failure is massively, massively important in terms of self-development and self-awareness.
And is there any sort of examples, I guess, of experiences that you've gone through or that you've seen of people going through that have allowed them to recognize these strengths or recognize these weaknesses?
I think personally, I think academically for me, I was always a dead confident teenager, but even at school and then at college and university and stuff, I always found myself submitting work sometimes, and I would think, right, I've absolutely nailed that. I'm really, really good at this. And then you get it back and it would be a really rubbish grade. And I think that's probably the biggest or the most profound kind of example I can think of. I remember once I handed in an essay at uni and I thought I'd absolutely nailed it. I thought I was guaranteed an A. And I think it came back a D.
Yeah.
But I totally missed the point, I think. But that, I think that was really important for me, because actually it kind of spurred me on to, although it's a bit difficult because once the essay was done, like that was it finished, and I didn't really have to go back to it. But I do remember kind of going through all my notes and some of the research and stuff I'd done, and I was looking for the key points that I hadn't managed to get out in the essay. So I think even naturally there was that kind of, okay, so I got it wrong, I thought I had it right, where did I go wrong? And you kind of wanted to know almost for next time, even though there wasn't a next time. So I think, for me, it's quite important to kind of experience that.
Yeah, and I guess as well, you'll have experiences of this as well as myself, where without obviously name dropping or anything like that, but within the sort of teaching sphere and coaching sphere, one of the most satisfying things that you see or you witness is when an individual you've worked with and you see them go through that journey of
for sure,
being not great, or being a bit rough around the edges, and you obviously don't take satisfaction in them failing, but when you see over a period of time them, they've maybe got an assessment that they failed, or a grade that they didn't get, or a performance that made them didn't look not that great, and then building on that over time and seeing that progression.
So one of the most positive experiences I had just last academic year was from it was one of our coaching students. It was the first year. She'd come from school, and she's a brilliant student. And obviously, I'm not going to name drop, but she was absolutely outstanding. And her sports were sort of hall-based sports like netball and stuff like that. And but she was really, really keen. She loved taking stuff on. She loved the challenges. Her work was always on time. It was always of a really, really high standard, both practical and theory work. Really, really good. I remember once it was we were in a sort of indoor pitch area, so the sports of choice were football and rugby, and I was just, we'd finished whatever the class were doing. I said, right guys, we've got a bit of time, does anyone want to lead a session? And nobody came forward. Everyone was just like, and I said, come on guys, your group of coaches. And she just grabbed the bull by the horn, stuck her hand up and said, I'll take a football session. I thought, fair play, great. So she tried to deliver this football session kind of just off the bat, and it didn't really go very well. It was a bit disjointed. There was obviously a lack of planning there. She'd done it just spur of the moment type thing. But her, in terms of like coaching and her leadership and stuff like that, it was really, really, it was just flat. She couldn't get the guys to focus. She couldn't get them to do anything. And in the end, once we finished the class, she actually burst into tears. She was crying. I think she felt really, really embarrassed, and I think she felt really vulnerable at that point, that she'd kind of put herself out there and it hadn't gone as well as she thought it had. And then I remember that happening, and I didn't feel sorry for her because I knew she was so good and so capable, and I knew that this was going to be a really, really good opportunity for me to kind of talk her down from that vulnerability and help her see that actually this is a really, really good thing. And we had about a 15-minute conversation, and I talked about how great she was in other spheres. I talked about maybe some of the things that had gone wrong in that session that we just done and how they could be improved next time. And she came away from it smiling again. And I went and assessed her for her graded unit later that year, and she absolutely smashed it. It was the highest mark I think. She got 39 out of 40, which is just tremendous. Like that's a really, really very high score, very hard to do. So I was really, really pleased with that. That she'd obviously taken that away. And she spoke to me about it at the end of the year as well. She said, yeah, that was a really big moment for her, kind of putting herself out there, realising that it wasn't what she wanted it to be or the image she had in her head, and kind of going from constantly being successful and constantly being played up by the staff as well, to kind of having that level, that moment where she hadn't succeeded. And I think she took an awful lot away from it in terms of kind of realising what her strengths and weaknesses are. And then she says she never delivered to. She says all her sessions since then have been top notch, so she never really wanted to repeat that experience. So yeah, no, it was a really rewarding conversation, I think, in the end.
Brilliant. And also one thing that sticks out, and I guess you might have an opinion on this, where the attitude towards exposing yourself to failure, how key do you find that when it comes to either the students or the players or the professionals that ultimately become these people that are successful or become ones that we respect?
I think that's a really, really valid point, actually. When I think about that, and I don't think I'd really considered that properly before, but when I think about it now, the guys who were never willing to volunteer to lead a session when they had half an hour left and stuff, they were the guys that didn't necessarily get the best results. And I think it's probably just because they weren't always willing to kind of get the practice in, just to put themselves out there, to kind of get used to different things and try different settings. So when it came to them, their actual sessions, it was just more of the same, very bland, very one-dimensional type stuff. And it never really went anywhere. There was never a moment of kind of this really exciting, that's brilliant, that's really good, because I don't think they'd ever had the nerve to try that in case it went wrong, and to sort of sample it and see how they could get it right. So yeah, I think I do think if you shy away from those moments, you probably do yourself a bit of injustice in some ways.
And I guess another point that comes from that is the influence that you can have on people around you, or the sort of environment that you're in when you put yourself out there, because it's a very clear point in, you pointed out that embarrassment can be a massive risk, but then at the same time there's that element of you can get twice as much satisfaction out of something when it goes well. And the influence that, well, clearly that student that has done that has had a very big sort of impact on how you perceive that individual and how you perceive those that don't do that. So I guess the sort of point I'm trying to make is, how important is it that you show to other people that you're willing to do that?
I think it is. Even within the class, despite that bad sort of performance on her part, she was always and never stopped being seen as one of the better students by her peers as well. So I think that's also really, really important, is that when people put themselves forward in those situations and they show, you know, I'm willing to give that a bash, whether it goes well or poorly, they're still seen by their peers as being kind of more just more self-aware, more competent, and more of a leader, I think. So yeah, I think it is really, really important. It's kind of just getting across to them that that's how you do that. That's how you get there, is just by putting yourself out there and giving it a shot.
Do you think it shows other people confidence?
Oh, massively. Yeah, I think so. I think that is the definition of confidence, isn't it? Trying things that are new, or trying things in difficult situations that other people maybe aren't willing to try. To risk being embarrassed or to risk failure, I think is to show that you're confident, to say, yeah, like, I'm going to do that, I'm going to give it a shot.
Yeah, even though the consequences of that failure can almost have like a negative effect on
Yeah,
your confidence
playing
as well.
playing it safe in life is never seen as a confident option, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. And then I guess that brings us on to the next sort of point that we discussed prior about at what point does that failure aspect become a negative? Because obviously the point we've made so far is that, you need to be confident to take on that failure. But then is there a point where confidence maybe becomes so low because of so much failure that you're not seeing enough success?
So there's a really, really common phrase that says, winning is a habit, but so is failure. And I think when failure does become a habit, that's when it becomes damaging. I think having worked with a lot of students and things like that over the last few years, you see the ones who take a knock and then can come back from that. And, one or two setbacks in their academic career, and it really spurs them on a wee bit to kind of push on. And the ones who are consistently not meeting the standards, that has a really bad impact on them. They kind of think, well, I don't really have that ability. I'm not as good as my classmates, or I'm not able to do this anymore. So I think it's hard to define at what point failure becomes a negative. I think it probably is to do with the psyche of the person involved. At what point do they become less motivated? At what point do they become less confident? At what point, if it's a results based business, as sports so often is, at what point are their failures starting to really cost financially, or in terms of results and things like that. So I think when it becomes a habit and it's consistent, I think it becomes a negative. But just intermittently, I think it can be a very beneficial thing.
Yeah, and again, a point from that is when you're maybe not in control as much of the winning and losing. The example you gave there is like a sporting example. Like, obviously, as a team, you can sometimes get promoted into a league that's much tougher and not see much success when you're so used to it. When you're failing a lot and you can't really control it, what would you say is important, or how would you maybe reach success when you're in that situation? Say, and again, we could relate that to work, where like you're maybe going through a bit of a rut where for example, your students are, it's a poor class, you're not getting any success with them, you don't feel like you can connect with them. How can we get success from that?
I think this is when it becomes about perception of failure. Success is different to achievement, and I think a lot of people kind of cross that over. When you talk about your team that gets promoted to a new league, being in that league is a success. You're not going to go into that league and expect to win every game. Maybe it's a success just to stay in that league, even if you just stay in by a very small margin. So I think what's really important is defining success based on your surroundings and the objectives and the different factors going on. Success isn't necessarily always achieving. You can succeed when you lose, or when the result's not as you wanted it to be. And I think that's a really, really important thing that people get away from. People tend to measure success against other people, and I think that's wrong in a lot of ways. I think what we have to do is measure success internally first, and decide, well, just because I'm not achieving anything doesn't mean I'm not being successful. And I think that is what really brings about a change in people, and they really start to be able to see small progress in different areas when they can do that. So I think it is about redefining what success is based on an individual basis.
Great point. It is good about the perception, though, where it's so easy to get caught up in the rut of comparing yourself to other people. Especially when it's something that you're maybe slightly attached to, and you're maybe wanting success that they potentially have, but it might not be something you can control as much.
Yeah, I think it is about perception hugely.
Yeah, massively. And next question would be, what made you realize that failure was necessary to grow?
It's really hard to stick a sort of defining moment on the kind of penny drop moment where I thought, I'm going to have to fail to get better here. I think if you were to ask me where I would see it most often, it would be in teaching. I think I am year after year, I am seeing students succeed having failed certain assessments, and they always get there in the end, one way or the other. So I think the best example would be through teaching and things like that. I think showing them kind of where they've gone wrong and then giving them that chance to kind of redo it and have it again really does show, that they can improve and how they improve. And I think it kind of helps people identify maybe choosing a different technique or a different approach to the same problem, and giving them an opportunity to retry it in a different way. And I think that for me is what really shows that success or failure is important for success. I think is when you can see a student have a problem or have a hurdle or an obstacle, they fail, and then they go back and they approach it a different way and they succeed. And I think that really shows you the kind of resilience of people, and also how they the trial and error element of it, to be honest. I think.
What about your
answers your
experience?
question.
No, it does. It's a good point. What about your experience?
I don't know. I suppose I would rely probably on sport and having lost sporting games and things. And as a person in a leadership position in those situations, people usually look to you for answers at times. And so I think what it makes you do is, personally, I think I realized that when you fail, it kind of brings about this kind of evaluation process, and you kind of have to think, well, why was that? Why did that happen that way? And I think that evaluation process is really important in recognizing where you went wrong and how you could maybe improve it again in future, or different approaches that you might take in future. So I would think I think for me personally, having lost games or things like that would probably be most often where I would have to bounce back quite quickly. You're facing a new team the next week, the week after, and you have to expect to win that one to make up for the loss the week before and things like that. So I think that would be it for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think as well, and I don't know if this is something that you feel is relatable as well, but almost even breaking it down even more into certain elements of, your game or your skills within sport as well. And it goes back to that point about the teaching. And I feel that, because obviously we both have been chucked in at the deep end almost with the teaching element.
Sure.
And almost the fact that you're exposed to that, it's a bit of a sink and swim.
Yeah.
And there's times when you're drowning,
mm-hmm.
but like you said, you need to learn quickly, just like you're bouncing back within sport. You need to learn quickly in order to understand that was a beneficial thing, that you were drowning initially. I didn't really know what I was doing.
Yeah.
Having to then come back and have to improve. Otherwise it's not going to work.
I think
you've got that pressure. Yeah, you've got that pressure on you that you have to do something. Otherwise, and it comes back to, how passionate are you about something? It comes back to, do you really want what you think you want?
Yeah.
Obviously, right, you get into teaching, you want to get to a certain level of teaching and a certain level of competence. You will be tested, you will be chucked tests throughout your career in the classroom, where you need to respond in a way that, right, how much do I actually want this? Because if you find out that you don't, then you need to pivot and look down other paths. And I guess it kind of comes down to, that's what I was thinking with a sport. You have a skill that you have to master. Sure. And then you always get to a point where you're maybe practicing a skill and you get bored because you think it's repetitive. And that's, again, the test of how much do you really want it.
Yeah.
The same with teaching. If you love something, you don't give up on it that easily. You persist through that element of, I'm not getting it, but I need to continue learning so that I crack it.
Yeah, I really think that is a big part of it, isn't it? Is that kind of that motivation to kind of try and undertake the challenges to get to where you want to go. I think, there's been lots of times I think there's subjects at school I failed at and stuff, and I never like some of them, like just maths and things like that. You know, I never really bothered me because I didn't want to use it for anything. You know what I mean? I just took it as a subject. Whereas there were things that I maybe didn't do as well in at school. I remember I got a B for PE in the end, and I was really really annoyed about that because I wanted to go and be a PE teacher, so I really wanted that A. So I think that does make a huge difference. Yeah, I think when I look at some of my students now, you know, some of them fail and they go, oh well, okay, and they don't really. It's like they don't care that much. And then you get the ones who really want to go and they have that clear career goal. Sorry, you know, and if they fail something or they even just get a little bit less than what they wanted to get, or a little bit less than that expected level, they you know they're really kind of they're really upset about it, and they want to try harder, and they're more motivated to go on and try again in the future. So I think a lot of it does come down to the kind of area that you're in, and you know, if you're failing and you're not really that bothered about the fact you're failing, that tells me that you're probably not that interested in the subject as a whole. I think when that happens, that's when people stop kind of caring, and that's probably when failure does become a habit. You sort of feel like, you know what, I'm not really that motivated to kind of achieve. I don't really care anymore. So I think that's a big part of it as well. Yeah, just that kind of love for what you're doing.
Yeah, well, look, I think that is quite a good start to the podcast conversations episode. I thoroughly enjoyed that. It could be something that we could do again on a different topic. We could delve even further. But I think probably the main takeaway for me is the difference between healthy failure and unhealthy failure.
I think so. I think when it comes to healthy failure, just like a last wee point, I think it's what people don't often do is practice failing, and I think that's a mistake. I like to give people, particularly people I'm teaching, an environment to fail and that's comfortable for them. You know, make it clear that when you're out on placement or whatever, okay, that's the time that you can't fail. You've got to be good at it. You know, you've got to delivering a service to other people. I think when they come into the classroom, that's when they have an opportunity to fail. When they're sitting the test, that's when they can't fail. But in the classroom, they can try, and if they get it right, great. If they don't, so I think when it comes to healthy failure, there has to be an environment created for people where they feel comfortable failing, they feel comfortable giving things a try, almost like a practice run. And I think that can be really important. So,
creating that safe environment, basically, that they can fail and it won't have as big an impact as if when it matters.
Yeah. Have you ever seen Star Trek?
I'm not a Star Trek man.
Okay, so like on Star Trek, they had what's called the Kobayashi Maru, and it was like a test that the captains of the Starfleet would go on, and it's supposed to be an unbeatable test. So no matter what happens, the prospective captain would always fail the test. Turns out that, you know, the hero James T. Kirk, he cheated and passed anyway. But you know, the point is that they realized that in giving people these leadership positions, they would give them a kind of area where they were always going to fail. It was more about how did they approach the problem, and what did they learn from that, in that kind of safe environment before they went and became a captain of a ship. So yeah, I always think that always stuck with me. I think, and I think, you know, having a safe place to kind of fail and practice failure and learn is important in life.
I love the little analogy to finish. You might win a lot of fans with that Star Trek story. Unfortunately, it's not me.
It might go the other way. You might lose a lot of listeners based on that.
Absolutely. Right. Well, that will be a wrap.
Great.
And thanks very much for your input, Jack.
Been a pleasure.
All right.